Merchant's Tale was written between 1387 and 1400, and it is a medieval fabliau, which is a brief comic tale in verse, usually scurrilous and often obscene. The style is simple, vigorous, and straightforward, and usually the key features consist of being set in the present tense, real settings like familiar places, and ordinary characters such as tradesmen, peasants, priests, students, and restless wives. Therefore, the fabliau presents a lively image of everyday life among the middle and lower classes. However, although the plots are meant to be seen as realistic, the authenticity of these stories and how accurately they depict 14th century life can be called into question. The Merchant's Tale is a part of the Canterbury Tales, which tells the story of a group of 31 pilgrims who meet while travelling from the Tabard Inn in Southwark to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury. To pass the time on the journey, they decide to each tell 2 tales on the journey there and the journey home. The collection of stories are held together by a framing device, the story of the pilgrimage. In this way, 2 narratives are operating at the same time within the work. In the links between the tales, the pilgrims argue and converse in the way that brings the characters to life. This frame narrative is usually a method for other tales to be mentioned, however, there isn't usually a decisive plot. Chaucer's literary influences include the Divine Comedy, written in 1320 by Dante Alighieri, which is a poem about the spiritual journey of a man through life. He discovers the nature of sin and its consequences. Similarly, in The Merchant's Tale, the merchant, despite his bitterness and cynical view of marriage, marries. This is not out of religious obedience, but to fulfill his selfish desire to have an heir. As well as this, the Decameron, written between 1313 and 1375 by Giovanni Boccaccio, is structured as a framed story containing 100 tales. These tell a multitude of romantic tales ranging from tragic to erotic. They also include witty and practical jokes as well as life lessons. Like Chaucer's The Merchant's Tale, it looks at different stages of life. However, one difference is that in the Decameron, the young aristocrats tell each other tales in an orderly fashion, and the work lacks the boisterousness of Chaucer's tales. Furthermore, The Romance of the Rose, written in 1230 by Guillaume de Lorry and Jeanne de Meun, is a medieval poem. It is styled as a dream vision and focuses on love, women, and female sexuality, which is reflected in several of Chaucer's tales. The dream visions focuses on interpreting allegory, the distance between a metaphorical character within the fictional world and the meaning of that character to the reader in the real world, which is also developed by Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales.
What is a revenge tragedy? A tragedy in which the tragedy is brought about by the pursuit and accomplishment of revenge. The revenge tragedy was very popular during the Elizabethan and Jacobean periods, and it has owed its popularity largely to the influence of Seneca, the ancient Roman dramatist. So, what are the key tropes of revenge tragedy? 1. Some murder is committed and the ghost of the murdered person appears to some close relative or friend of his and enjoins him to take revenge. 2. Revenge is conceived of as a sacred duty and not as a kind of wild justice. The avenger is moved by a sense of sacred duty and not out of any passion, say greed or hatred for some personal injury. 3. There is a piling up of crude, physical horror upon horror's head, and thus there is much that is sensational and melodramatic. These terrors are intensified by the repeated appearance of the ghost. 4. In the end, there are a number of deaths, and the stage is left littered with dead bodies. 5. There is the abundant use of the imagery of violence and terror. Webster's principal source for the story was William Paynter's collected volume of tales, The Palace of Pleasure. Paynter's volume contained translations of many stories by French, Italian, and Greek writers, including François de Bellaforest's adaptation of Matteo Bandello's novelle.